Today we're starting Siman Kuf Halach Yud Aleph. Let's first read the mechaber. Yisrael. Be patient. Yisrael shemacha kli lev kechavim. Yid sold a kli to a guy. V'chazav lachar mimenu, and then he brought it back from him tzarich tevillah. So he needs to tevillah it. Aval a mishkana. I'm reading the mechaber so far. Aval a mishkana biyadai v'chazav b'tar mimenu. If he gave him a mashkin, and then he took it back from him, then he doesn't need to tevillah. That is to say, is the Yid owned the Kli, the first part of it. Then the Yid owned the Kli, he was tevillah, like he was supposed to. And then he gave it to a guy, and now he got it back from him. So this Kli already had Tevillas Keilim. So we say is that no, it's Chayv Tevillas Keilim again, because he got it from a guy. If he got the Kli, it was owned by a guy. The fact that it once had Tevillah in its history doesn't make a difference. It was bought from the guy, and is mechiras to do Tevillas Keilim. We spoke about this 2 times ago. We spoke about it's not such a common occurrence what's subscribing over here. We don't buy things like that. We don't sell pots to our neighbors. We spoke about it a few times ago about the Jewish companies that produce urns and pump pots. They produce them themselves, so it's owned by Yid from the beginning. We talked about the problem of what happens when they then sell it to a store. They sell it to Bed Bath & Beyond, and Bed Bath & Beyond sells it to you. So the Yid owned the Kli. So there was potter from Tevillas Keilim for a different reason. The Yid owned the Kli. He sold it to someone who was not Jewish, and now I bought it from him. That's an example of this thing that's Chayv Tevillas Keilim. You may remember we said that there's a Ramesh has a chiddush that maybe it's not Chayv Tevillas Keilim because it was once owned by Yid, and maybe the mechaber is only talking about where it was originally the very first owner was not Jewish. Most people don't know like that. We'll talk about that then. Okay, an example that we might come across of this kind of a thing, it's more the end of the mechaber, would be, again, it's not so common, but if someone would give their things to a pawn shop, so that person is doing what the mechaber says, he was mishkanoi biyad the guy, and then he was paid it from afterwards. So then what the mechaber says is it doesn't need tevillah. It depends on the setup between him and the pawn shop. If he does or doesn't own it, who owns it, and things like that. But that's the closest the closest most people would ever come to that kind of a thing. I will note that there's a question in Halacha Tez. You may remember it said Mishkan Avik Yechavim Klili Yisrael. Then you are Chayv Tevillas Keilim. Okay, so they talk about that. There's a difference between whether the guy gave a mashkin to the Yid or the Yid gave a mashkin to the guy, and it has to do with that the rules for Tevillas Keilim are not exactly who owns it. It has to do with Nishtakeh B'Yad Yisrael. We'll see it more in the Ramah. It has to be like them with the Chametz. It has to be where is it sitting by, not technically always by who owns it. Okay. So the closest example that most people ever have to this question, for real, this question about to tevillah it again after you gave it to a guy that's why it's on the screen, is about mechiras chametz. Okay? And that is, a number of the Achronim speak out, lots of them are in Aruch, but it's brought here like in Pischei Tshuva and Darkei Tshuva about it, is that when a person makes mechiras chametz, the din is, let me make a drop introduction. The din is, you're mechuyev to get rid of your chametz. You're not allowed to own any chametz in Pesach, because it says Bal Yirah. But the fact that the Torah says that says don't own it by the words Bal Yirah, don't see it, teaches you that the issur is to not own visible chametz. But if chametz is not visible, then there's no issur to own it. That's why the Torah says it in this unusual way. It didn't say don't own chametz, it don't see it. There's nothing really wrong with seeing chametz. I could walk past a bakery and see chametz, but I can't own chametz that's visible. And therefore, chametz that's beluah and Keilim is not asur at all. And of course, metal is not chametz. So my metal pot that I have at home, I have no reason to get rid of it. There's no reason to sell it, to get rid of that pot, because the pot is not chametz, and the bli is in the pot are not Bal Yirah. So there's really no reason min hadin to do it. The mechaber says it it says it Prohibition, maybe more places, but I know it says it in Tafnun Aleph. It says it's actually Machlokas in the Gemara. The mechaber passes like that man. He says if a person has Keilim of chametz over Pesach, then this is what you should do with them. So you shouldn't by mistake come to use them. Okay, but you're allowed to keep those Keilim. You're allowed to keep the Keilim over Pesach. There's nothing wrong with owning them. And so therefore, a number of the Achronim say, well, not only do you not have to get rid of your Keilim, but you don't want to sell your Keilim. The Gemara talks that you should destroy the Keilim. but then we don't postulate it. You're not mechuyev to destroy them. So a number of say, but so some people said we'll sell them together. We'll sell with the rest of our chametz. We'll sell the keilim that have chametz also. And they said you got a problem because if you sell those keilim, then when you buy them back after Pesach, then you mechuyev in tevillas keilim. It's a Yisrael shemacha keilim kechavim because lachrim. That's exactly what you did. You sold it to him on erev Pesach. You bought it back to him on Motzei Pesach. So now you're mechuyev in tevillas keilim. And a number of the Acharonim say, therefore, you should, but dafka not do this. You should not do that. Okay. At the same time, in some of the shtaras from mechiras chametz, this is from the Sefer mechiras chametz kuchas, I believe it's called. It has in the back 11 shtar mechiras chametzes. It has these ones are. I forgot. There's one that doesn't have its name on it. Is I'll look at my notes here. It says the other one is from Shulchan Aruch. Those are shtar mechiras chametz, and each one of them, they mention that they're selling the Keilim also. Okay, it speaks out that they're selling the Keilim. Now, I can't tell you 100% that proves that they did that, and that is because their mechiras chametz was different than ours is. Our mechiras chametz is in the modern mechiras chametz, we say we're selling all the chametz that I have. Okay? It's very generic. So if I would say I'm selling all the chametz that I have and all the keilim that it's in, and all my chametz pots, then that would be a potential issue. In the way they used to do mechiras chametz was they sold specific things. Okay, they said these things that are in that room are the things that I'm selling. So it could be that the keilim that they're selling over here were keilim that didn't need tevillas keilim. Okay, it could be that the things that they were selling a specific thing. The keilim be'kanam ashabahem ha'arik and a shecher. Okay, it could be that those keilim were wood. There could be those keilim were things that didn't need tevillas keilim. So it could be that what you're seeing here that the people sold the kli that had the mechiras. I'm sorry, the words are not so big. The fact that this person is selling the kli that had the chametz, it doesn't mean that they were selling something and then buying it back.
Our form has a similar formulation.
That says what?
The Hebrew form is a little different than the English form. Changing it for future years. But the Hebrew form actually says that we're selling all Keilim, she'enim chayavim b'tevillah.
She'enim chayavim b'tevillah. Okay, so it says so. You're late. Right. Okay, so I can't tell you that. Right, so he's selling the Keilim to have chametz, but he's talking about a specific person. He's saying this guy's selling the Keilim. But he's selling the Keilim of that person in this room. So the Keilim in this person in that room may have been Keilim in mechiras chametz. Like, for example, one of the
was written as a generic term.
Okay, so if it's general, then it's general. The ones that are more specific, I'm telling you, Keilim has a shtar for a guy selling his factory. I didn't put it here for Shabbos and for Pesach. Okay, so in that he's like very specific on what he's selling. He has all kinds of gory details of what they're selling and what they're not selling. So maybe they have to be. I mean, if you look in this one from Shulchan, he says this one I'm selling you without the Keilim. This one I'm selling you with the Keilim. I think it's the one, right? He said this one I'm selling this one with the Keilim, this one without the Keilim, as if maybe he cared about what Keilim. Okay, but there are some Acharonim who miyashid the minhag. There are people who sold it anyhow, and they give two different as far as why it could be that you could sell the Keilim and not be mechuyev in tevillas keilim when you get them back. Okay, the first is I told you that ownership per se is not always what decides whether it's chayav tevillas keilim. We're going to see it more in the Ramah. We're going to talk about nishtakeh b'yadev kechavim. Okay, it has to be that it's like really permanently part of the guy's ownership. And since everybody knows that the mechira we're doing is only going to be for a week, the stuff sits in my house anyhow, and everybody knows that in a week it's going to come back to me. So that it might be that technically he owns it, but by the contract it says I'm selling you my thing. But is that maybe that's not enough to be nishtakeh b'yadev? Maybe. And others say this. I believe the second thing I'm about to say is from Shlomo Kluger. He says is that everybody knows that mechiras chametz is harama. The mechiras chametz as harama only works. It can only work together with the fact this is its own separate child. But it only works because I have such an interest in selling my chametz that I go along with it. I'm trying to avoid the isser, or because I want to sell my chametz, or because it's not going to be b'shusi anyhow, so it works anyhow. All those kind of svaras of why it works, even though it's a harama, only makes sense on the chametz itself. The things that you're not mechuyev to sell, it doesn't work on it. So for the things that you're not mechuyev to sell, it's just a mechiras man. Okay, you're just doing a temporary sale. It's understood. All that's supposed to be understood, even though it says I'm telling you the chametz and the barrel. It's understood that the chametz is a real sale and the barrel is a mechiras man. Mechiras man wouldn't be making mechuyev tevillas again. Okay. Okay. One. Okay. Yeah, that's that. I'm stopping. Okay. Next.
Yeah, good.
Why is it klei schara?
He's buying it, sell back to you.
He's buying it, sell back. Right. When a person buys a key, that doesn't make it.
That doesn't make it tonight that he's going to sell it back to you. There has to be an absolute sale. So that's not.
It's tonight.
That doesn't part you from tevillas scale. The fact that I sold him as klei schara doesn't part. No. Let's say it is klei schara. So klei schara means is that if it has klei schara, he doesn't have to tell you. But when I buy klei schara from him and I mean to use it as Keilim, it's chayv in tevillas scale.
Right. If it's klei schara about a guy, you only have a klei schara about a guy, so it's not.
That's good. Even so, you're mechuyev to. That's good. You're chayv in tevillas scale.
It says the soil, and he says that the price doesn't work.
Of course, it's not true. Now, not only is it not true logically, he said, because then everybody would be put from tevillas scale.
Yeah.
But because everybody you buy clay, he's buying from a guy who's selling the sorry. But it's an earlier din also. Okay, it's in I can call off the ches before this. Okay. Now let's read the Rambam. Okay, now let's read the Rambam. The Rambam says, Yisrael v'avik yacham shakanu kli b'shutfis. If a Jew and a non-Jew bought a kli as shutfim, ain't tzarich tevillah. It doesn't need to have tevillah. Yeah, we're okay. Well, let me finish the Rambam and I'll tell you what I have to say about that. Yisrael shagan v'agazim mimenu Keilim. If a yid had his Keilim stolen from him, and then they gave them back. So the mechaber had said that if you sell your kli to a guy and then you buy it back to him, you're mechayiv in tevillas Keilim. But if it was stolen from you, you're not. Ain't tzarich tevillah, and the reason is because even though the guy owns it, the guy stole it from you and it's his. But the guy is a regular guy and is afraid to parade it out in public. And therefore, it doesn't qualify for being nishtakeh b'yad kacham. It's even though it's technically it might be his, but it's not his in the full sense of the word. What? So it potentially it's his. Okay, you're right. I should take that back. Even though you're just finishing Babas, so even though it potentially is his, but even so, it wouldn't make a difference. You're still not having tevillas scale because it's his in a certain sense, but not his in the full sense. Not in the sense of a tevillas scale. But if the government or somebody who has power took it from you, they stole it from you, and they gave it back, then tzrich and tevillah, because when that person takes it, then he has no qualms about showing it in public and doing what he wants with it, and therefore it's not only does he own it, but it's completely nishtakeh b'yad kacham. Okay, so the Ramah said, the first part of the Ramah, which is hopefully when he gave it to us, and the latter part says that if the yid and the guy are shutfim in a kli, then you don't have to do tevillah. Mirchashem next time we're going to talk about why that's true. Okay, right now we just take it as it is. We'll talk about why it's true, which will have its very practical nafkamina. Aside from the case of shutfis per se, you'll hear the practical application of it. And we're also going to find out that not everybody agrees with the Rambam. Okay, the din is like the Rambam, but we're going to talk about others who are prominent. One of the places who disagrees with the Rambam. Okay, now before I tell you two little points about this, there's a kasha. And the kasha is here. The Rambam says again, aside from one person who disagrees, the Rambam says that if it's a shutfis, you could use it without tevillas Keilim. And the question is that there's this really long taz beforehand, on the halacha beforehand, where the Taz says that if a yid and a goy pool their resources, that I give him a little metal and you give him a little metal, and then between us we make a kli. So the Taz has this chiddush to say that the status, whether that kli needs tevillah or doesn't need tevillah, depends on who was the roiv. If it's 60% of the yid's materials, it's potter from tevillas Keilim. If it's 60% the guy's materials, it's chayv in tevillas Keilim. Okay, it depends on right. Okay, now we're not talking about the chiddush of what the Taz says, just or what happens. I mean, if you go on the next page, and the Taz even goes on to the next page, at least in our print, it goes on to the next page. So the Ramah says over here that if there's a shutfis, then you're not chayv in tevillas Keilim. So what's the difference between the Taz's case? The Taz says the yid and the guy each gave up materials, so depending on who gave more, depends on whether it's chayim tevillah or not chayim tevillah. I don't say, if it says right here, the Rambam says that if there's a shutfis, then you're not chayim tevillah. I don't have a great answer. It seems to me that the answer probably
remains a shutzvus even after it's finished.
it remains a shutzvus. Yeah. Yeah. So it seems to me, unless I'm reading it wrong, it seems to me that the difference was that somehow over there, we have to judge the kli, and we're judging it by who made this kli. Was it made by the yid or was it made by the guy? So there we could look at it somehow when we're making the kli, we say is it a yid's kli or a guy's kli, and the roiv material, is mavatal, the miyat's material. Somehow different than over here, where two guys buy for shutfis, then of course they both own it. And somehow that's different. I don't really know the difference. Okay. Now a few little points about this din of shutfis before we move on to one more thing, and that is, you may remember a couple times ago, I mentioned to you, Rosh Miller had a chiddush. He said he wasn't convinced of it, but he said he considered such a chiddush, that if there's a nursing home that's owned by the Jewish community, that maybe that nursing home isn't Keilim tevillas Keilim. He wanted to say maybe it could be making for the glass, for the things that don't have Rabbanan, and his logic was, or part of his logic was, that the government pays a lot of attention to how you treat elderly people and other people in need, and the government, therefore, when if they don't like the way you're taking care of the people, if they look you over and don't like taking, they'll kick you out. Okay? They have the right to take control over a nursing home and run it the way they want if they feel you're not taking care of the people properly, and therefore he says maybe there's considered that they have somewhat of a shutfus in the nursing home because they have a controlling right up there. Okay, he said he wasn't convinced. He said maybe for Drabanan, so like the glass was really hard to table. Okay, I mentioned that we talked about that. Okay, just remind you, wake you. Okay, now, okay. So the first thing to say about Rama is when we say that the Yid and the Goy are shutfim, you could use it without tevillas Keilim. The first thing is that even the tiniest amount of shutfis, okay, it doesn't depend on how much the yid and the guy own. As long as the guy has some kind of a shutfis, that's good enough. Okay, and this idea became very important a couple of months ago. There was a hotel in a different city, and not under our hashgacha, and they were hosting a federation dinner, and I may have mentioned this dinner beforehand, and the dinner had 1,800 people coming to it, 1,700 people coming to it, and like 2 days beforehand, it was obviously a huge event, and 2 days beforehand, the hashgacha says, wait a second, they're doing it in this hotel, and the hotel is owned by a Jewish person. So if the hotel is owned by a Jewish person, we're using the hotel's glasses at the event. So do we have to tevel all of a sudden run out and tevel thousands or hundreds of glasses now, because in 2 days is going to be this event. We're using those glasses, so Kashrus-wise, they weren't worried about it. It was going to be used for cold. But the question was, do the mechiras tevillas Keilim? It's owned by a Jewish person. So they quickly made a meeting with the owner of the hotel to talk to him, and he was told how, yes, of course he's Jewish, and he proudly owns his hotel, and he's happy to be hosting this event, and blah, 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 blah. And in the conversation, they were able to get to him that, yes, in fact, he does have a minority, non-Jewish partner, which, of course, they made them very happy. I don't think they told him anything why. They were asking, about the tevillas Keilim, that they totally would have thrown him for a loop. But he did, that saved them. Okay. And people use this idea that a person could have even a minority ownership could save them from, allow them to use the kli without tevillas Keilim. People use it when they get stuck. Okay, they have a kli. We're going to see in Halacha Tezayin when people get stuck and they can't tevel a kli, then there's a possibility of giving a guy a chelik in that kli, and then you'll be able to use it without tevillas Keilim. Okay, we're going to talk about that. We've said this a bunch of times. We get to Halacha Tezayin. That's where the place is for that din. That's such a thing that people will do to avoid tevillas Keilim. That brings me to my next point, the second point, which is that the kula of a shutfus of a guy only helps and only works as long as there still is a shutfus of a guy. But if you give the guy a chelik, or he owns a chelik, and then you buy him out, or you sell it to somebody else, a Jewish person buys the whole thing from them, then it's Keilim tevillas Keilim. Okay, so that is to say, if a person said, I'm going to avoid tevillas Keilim by giving a chelik of my kli to someone who's not Jewish. And they say to the person working next to them, listen, can I do you a favor? I want to give you part of this ownership. And they give him a part ownership. But then the guy gives it back to him and says to him, okay, thank you for giving it to me. I did now, you're shuttered, and now you can have it, I'm giving it back to you. So if he says, you could use my chelik, that's okay. But if he gives it back to him, now you just bought it from the guy, and now it's Keilim tevillas Keilim. Okay, so to say that a person has a shutfis only helps as long as he has a shutfis. Okay, once he passes having a shutfis, and it goes back to being completely owned by Yid, then it doesn't help. Okay. So now we're going to move on to something else, which is really it's an introduction to what we're going to talk about next time. It's not it's like a side point to what we talk about next time. But being as I knew we were going to be short, that's why I wanted to talk about that. And that is we're going to talk about next time. It's going to come up as a part of next time is that we've talked about that the chiyuv tevillas keilim is assumed to be a chiyuv deraisa. Okay? It's almost a mechiras Gemara that the chiyuv to do tevillas keilim is a chiyuv deraisa. And on glass, it's only a chiyuv drabanan. Okay, we'll work with that assumption that it's a chiyuv deraisa. Basically, we're going to work with that assumption. But what about if a person wants to use the kli without having done tevillas keilim? Okay, he didn't do tevillas keilim, but he wants to use it anyhow. So there's a question whether the issue to use it now when he didn't do tevillas keilim is that an issue deraisa or is that an issue drabanan? Okay, that is to say, if we were to assume that the mitzvah of tevillas keilim is completely a drabanan, then there wouldn't be what to talk about it. The whole mitzvah to do is midrabanan, and then obviously the issue to use it would be a drabanan also. Okay, and so there are those. Well, let's talk about that for 1 second. There are those who want to read into the Rambam that the Rambam holds that the mitzvah of tevillas keilim, the entire mitzvah is a mitzvah drabanan, which is, of course is very shver. It's come out of a mechiras Gemara that says not like that. So one of the achronim who speaks, if I could use the word, a primary source about this question about whether the issue to use it as a deraisa or drabanan is Yeshus Yaakov, and he says, because I can name Yashad Rambam. The reason why the Rambam implies in certain ways that it's a drabanan, in other places he sounds like it's a deraisa. The reason why sometimes he sounds like it's only a mitzvah drabanan is because if you read the words carefully, you'll see that it's a deraisa to do tevillah. It's a drabanan to not use the kli without tevillah. So the words of the Rambam that says it's also drabanan, I should have put the words up for you. Those words are going on the issa to use it. But the mitzvah to do it, that's the deraisa part of it. And that's how he explains the different words in Rambam. Well, it's not such a great reading into Rambam. That's how he wants to say. Okay.
Every time he uses not bittul aseh, it's one say.
That's what he wants to say. That's only issa drabanan to do it. Right.
It's not bittul aseh.
That's what he wants to say. Right. He says it's completely
for the person who wants it, or for somebody else.
Anybody. Anyone who uses it, it's only us and drabanan to use it. Okay. So now, there's some people. There are very few, if I can use the word, real rayas to this day. And I'm going to mention one to you soon. I'll mention one raya to you in a second. But there are rayas what people hold about it. There aren't many rayas to why it should be, or like rayas as in like a Gemara that's much like that. I'll tell you one in a second. There's going to be a base mirror we'll talk about next time that implies that it's a deraisa. There's a dik in the Shulchan Aruch that sounds like it's a deraisa also. Again, not I don't want to use the word raya. I mean, it's a deed that he holds like that. But it's just like in passing that he says like that he gives the impression that he thinks it is deraisa. It has to do with a lot of what we're going to talk about has to do with the din in Hilchos Shabbos, which is you're now at a tevillah keilim on Shabbos. And a lot of the discussion there is whether it is or is not tikkun monah to do it. And the way the Shulchan Aruch brings it, what he talks about, implies that he thinks that the issue to use it without it is a deraisa. Okay, so one, I'm going to show you the raya that to me were interesting. I'm going to tell you. Okay, there's a Prima Garden. And Prima Garden says like this. It's in Hilchos Pesach. Okay, and he says like this. I understand Shin Chav Gimel. Okay, Shin Chav Gimel is where it talks about this issue of doing tevillas keilim on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Okay, it says like this. Below Pesach, a person realizes that he needs to drink the daled kaises, and he doesn't have any. Okay, he doesn't have a kais. The only kais that he has is one that didn't have tevillas keilim to it yet. Okay, so ignore this part. Yesh Lema, he could tevel in dirty wood. Don't worry about that for now. Okay, but that's our situation. Is the person has a cup, and the cup, the only cup that he has for daled kaises is one that didn't have tevillas keilim to it. So he's stuck with Yom Tov, and he wants to use them. He wants to use the kli. So what should he do? So he says like this. Efsher, what he should do is he could use it. Why? Because to us, he asay drabanan, the mitzvah drabanan to drink from daled kaises could be doicha, the iser drabanan on to use glass without tevillah. Okay? Because since glass is only chayv and tevillah with drabanan, and so using it is only iser drabanan to use that glass, so therefore the drabanan of daled kaises is asay doicha lois asay, the lois asay to not use glass. He says, but if it would be a metal cup, then it's matas, which is it's a mitzvah deraisa to do tevillas keilim. Then, as you see in your day, there's a question about that vav is, but okay, in your day it says that it's a mitzvah deraisa. So then, by matches, you wouldn't be able to say asay derech say. Now, he doesn't mean the mitzvah to do to do tevillas Keilim, because the mitzvah to do tevillas Keilim, here the question not to do tevillas Keilim, here the question is the assay of drinking from Dal Koisos should be assay the chalois assay of the drinking from the cup without tevillah to it. Okay? So that implies that he holds that drinking from the cup without tevillas Keilim by metal is a device also. Okay? That's a dig here in the Prim Gadol. Then for you, those who are curious, he has a little more. He says maybe it's not the idna. Maybe that wouldn't. Maybe you can't say. So maybe you can't say. I say the chos it's not the idna because when you tevel it, it's not the time when you're drinking from it. Okay, they don't happen at the same time. So that's what he talks about. Maybe it doesn't count as I say the chos. Okay, so that's one of the people. There's a dig in this Prim Gadol that he holds that the use of the kli. The use of the kli when it's not tevel, if it's metal, or it is maybe a device. Okay, I didn't jump to London. It's in the Mishra stuff. There's only one of them in Tough Tevillah, so you'll be able to find it if you're looking for it. Okay, okay. Now the next is a raya. I've seen it before. And Rappaport reminded me of it. I've seen this raya before, and that's like this. The Gemara says There's only one Gemara about tevillas Keilim. It's one Amud Gemara here, and the end of Avodah Zarah. Habalim to many people. And the Gemara says, the Gemara is talking about whether you chayv in tevillas Keilim, and how do we know in this and that. And the Gemara asks a kasha and says like this: one way, if it would have said only a certain pasuk, hava amina, that in order to do tevillas Keilim, it needs herav shemesh kinita. That when you tevel kli, the tevillah is not completed until you have herav shemesh. You have to tevel, just like it says after may nida yisata, so a nida is tevel at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Her tevillah is not complete until herav shemesh. So too the tevillah of a kli wouldn't be complete until you have herav shemesh. Okay, so this is the only thing that's sort of like a raya in the Gemara. Well, what does that mean? The tevillah is not complete until herav shemesh. Well, Indian, why would we care that tevillah doesn't end until herav shemesh? What else could it mean if not for that? It means that am I allowed to use the kli? What else could the Torah have meant when it would say the tevillah is not over until herav shemesh? What are you going to do? For the need, it means that if she would touch truma now, it will become tummy. It won't become tummy. That's why we care whether the tumah finishes now or at herav shemesh. But why would we care whether the tevillah of a kli would end at herav shemesh? What would it mean? You would tevel it, and it doesn't complete the herav shemesh. I mean, in other words, in the oilam, it's not finishing till herav shemesh. I mean, who cares? Well, why is that my problem? Why does the Torah tell me that? Why would there be a significance? Unless the Torah means to tell me that you're not allowed to use it till the tevillah is complete. And therefore, if you tevel at 4 o'clock, don't use it until 8 o'clock when there'll be herav shemesh. That's the implication of the Gemara. That's at least the havmi of the Gemara. That you're not allowed to, you're the rights and not allowed to use it until herav shemesh.
Whose raya is that?
This is a raya I saw from some Achronim, Chedushim Burim. I saw from a few different people, from later Achronim who bring such a raya. Rabbi Rappaport has a whole lot to say about whether, well, maybe that's only the Havmida Gemara, maybe not the Maskonos Gemara. Okay, and the Gemara is just saying it's a Havmida. If it only would have said this pasuk, I would have thought that. Maybe yes, and maybe not. Okay, but it's the closest we come to a raya is in a Gemara that says like that. Okay, when I show you this Prim Gadol doesn't tell you how he knows it or why he knows it. It's just a diet that he seems to have thought like that. It doesn't. The issue is Yaakov says it's pashut that it's a drop on, and I have nothing to say. And he brings rayas also. Some of his rayas are also in the Gemara, but without strong, okay.
So Yaakov finishes off that I have many more.
He says I have many more rayas. Yeah. So in Dayan Weiss, when he talks about, I was going to mention in a second, Dayan Weiss, when he says, I'm not so convinced about his rayas. He says, but Yaakov says I have many more rayas, so we'll believe him. Okay, we'll believe him and we'll just accept that what he said, that it probably is true. He says, I don't know all those rayas. The rayas they told me weren't so high. I wasn't so convinced about them. Here's another raya. The Yeshua Yaakov, I wasn't going to mention it, but a raya from here, the Gemara also that you thought there's a havmi you have to be taken on the third and the seventh day. Okay.
Is this a real isser? Or is it just you've been mavakel? Maybe there's no isser really. It's just being mavakel outside.
Okay, so but before I was about to say that, very good. Very good. You must look at my notes. Okay, I was about to say which is so far I told you there are some people who say that there's it's an isser doraisa to use a kli without tevillah. Okay, Shlomo Zalman has a compromise. Okay, I'm going to tell you in a second that people think it's a drop on it. Shlomo Zalman has a compromise to say it's sort of a doraisa. Okay, and that is I only know about this thing that he has is in the Sefer Tevillas Keilim. He has a whole introduction. He has 10 introductions to the Sefer, and in one of them talks about whether he has a part there whether it's Issa Deraisa Drop on it. And in there he brings that Rosh Zalman wrote him the following. Okay, I'm going to show you what Rosh Zalman wrote him. Okay, this is what Rosh Zalman wrote to that person. Okay, he says, imamrina, the Isser Shtam Shesh D'Rabbanan, even if it's only Asim D'Rabbanan to use the Kli without tevillah, he said that only is true if you have no way to tevillah it while you're dealing with it. But in Yochel L'Hatvil, if you have a way to be tevillah and you use it without tevilling it, then that's a bittul aseh. So it's not an Isser per se. It's not an Isser per se. It's an Isser. It's a bittul of the aseh. If I don't go ahead and do the tevillah right now, I could be teviling it, and I'm not being tevilah, so that's a bittul aseh. Okay, I don't, the words are not going to come because otherwise you'd never be over in the aseh. He says, what would be the mitzvah? The mitzvah is to do it. You'd never be over in it. He says, it must be that there's an Isser. There's a bittul aseh when it's within possibility.
So what else is this?
So the Isser D'Oraisa would be understood like as a lois aseh. Don't eat out of the
Where does
cliff.
it come from?
Yeah, was it where it comes
I don't know where it would come from. What?
Would be a lachabal mechiras.
Yeah, so
A lot of no. There's a difference. No, because if it's a lav, it would mean that you at all times you're never allowed to use it. So I can't table it, so you can't table it. So you can't do it anyhow. If you,
Where's the possible?
I have no idea what it would be. I told you I have something to explain to you where that would come from. He said so this is like an in between. You could tell me if that's what they mean. Maybe the people who say that's all that they meant. But he says his meaning if he wants to say is, if you don't have a choice to tevillah, if right now you don't have a choice, and he has lots of chedushim, we'll talk about next time, or maybe in 2 times, about his chedushim that he has about that. He says, even if you want to say that's a drabanan, that's only when you have a choice. Now, he doesn't mean, he says, avam yochel lahatbil, and you use it, he doesn't mean is that you're eating lunch in the mikveh. Okay? He doesn't mean is that you're literally sitting there. He means that it's within reason that a person can be tevillah. Okay? But it makes you, so it's a little bit, it makes it hard to understand some of the points that we saw, which is, the discussion about whether what you should do on Shabbos, all of a sudden becomes a very different discussion, okay? Because this place can talk about, are you allowed to tevillah on Shabbos? You're not allowed to tevillah on Shabbos. And then we're going to talk in Halacha Tezayin. What should you do when you have it on Shabbos and you can't tevillah it? Okay, well, what's the question? If you have a kli on Shabbos and you can't tevillah it, then you can't tevillah it. So maybe that discussion, maybe that whole shiloh is a shiloh of a drabanan. Okay, that could be that sort of case. Okay, and it could be also that this will be miyashiv, if that'll make you, if maybe that's the pshat in the Herav Shemesh. And the Gemara says you have to make the Herav Shemesh, would mean is that it's a bittul aseh if you use the kli without that. Maybe it didn't mean it's like an isser, maybe it's the same thing. Maybe those who said the rice and Rosh Hashanah were saying the same thing. Oh, either way. Okay. Now, the people who say that it's a drabanan, okay, I told you Shus Yaakov is the big proponent, and others make it like it's posh like that. Okay, the Bir Halacha, when he talks about it in Hilchos Shabbos, the Bir Halacha says he doesn't even bring anybody to it. He just says, of course it's posh that's only drabanan, and therefore blah 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 blah. Whatever he has to say about that. That the issue to use it without tevillah, of course it's a drabanan. Shus Yaakov, when he says it, he says he doesn't use these words. The words, the way I understand it is, let's say there's a din that a person is mechuyev to do kisi hadam. Okay, you shech the behema, you have to kisi hadam. Or you live in Eretz Yisrael and you have a behema, so you have to give ma'aser behema. Okay, so what happens if you don't do that? Okay, what if the person doesn't do kisi hadam? It doesn't stop me. Doesn't make. It has nothing to do with the meat. The meat is not. Doesn't have to wait for kisi hadam to be kosher. If I don't take ma'aser behema, it doesn't make my animal shave. It doesn't make it usher. So they're looking at it the same way that there's the mitzvah of tevillas keilim. And I have a mitzvah of tevillas keilim. Okay, so you have something you're supposed to do. You're supposed to shake lulav also. If you don't shake lulav, it doesn't mean something else is wrong. It doesn't mean your sukkah is possible. And Shus Yaakov says, he says, I have a raya that my din is true. He says, we'll see in Shulchan Aruch that if a person didn't tevel that keilim, the food stays kosher. He says, so the tumah that the Yerushalmi talks about, that's on a kli, that tumah doesn't mean that it affects the food, doesn't make my food treif, doesn't do anything to my food, nothing. I have a mitzvah to do this thing, so I have a mitzvah to do it. It's sort of like, there's a din d'Rabbanan that until I do a mitzvah, I'm not allowed to eat. Because if I don't eat, I might forget to do the mitzvah. If I eat, I got it so busy, I'll forget to do the mitzvah. So too, the Rabbanan said, don't use the kli to your tevillah, because or else you're going to forget to tevillah it. But it's not that there's anything, it's not that the Torah said you're not allowed to use it. It's like don't do this until you, don't use it until you do it to your scale.
Prohibition, even if it's a din d'oraisa, it doesn't matter if being to a bun of d'oraisa.
No, because if it's a d'oraisa, we don't think of the d'oraisa as, we don't think of the d'oraisa as like a incentive. It's not we don't, I'm trying to keep you.
Even if it's a deraisa, the food will still be kosher. So you can.
Not the Shulchan says not. He said.
But the example you gave from kisoy adam, that's a deraisa. So you're going to kisoy adam, so the food is still kosher.
So that's the question. But the Shulchan doesn't. He doesn't look like it. He says is the fact that the din is that the food is kosher. Now of course, you can argue. You could say that it could be a din deraisa and the food could be kosher. But he said nah. He says I told you the mix. He says I'm not convinced of all of his rights.
Yeah.
He said he said he had a lot more rights. So I believe in you. Okay. So it is interesting in Hilchos Challah.
The Rambam says the Torah for Ma'aseh Behemah.
Yeah.
Midiraisa, you could never give Ma'aseh Behemah. You're not allowed the mitzvah.
He's not involved in the mitzvah.
Midiraisa.
Well, what? So I was thinking about that. Think about what happens if he eats them? Wait. What happens if he eats them? What happens if he eats all the behemoths? Does he not involve the mitzvah at that point? Why? He didn't do the mitzvah.
Unless you eat the whole Eder in one
That's a
go.
What if he eats in 3 shots? What's the difference? But if he eats them all up, then
If you take away one behemoth, you haven't been mevatel the mitzvah ma'aseh yet.
If you have 10 behemoths, you have
we had 10, and
Even if you have 10, because you could be metzaref another behemoth from somewhere else.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So there are kashas on many of his rayas, but he makes the assumption, as is to be halacha, as do many others, that the issur here is only issur d'Rabbanan. That's going to be. I'm mentioning it today, even though you don't hear yet the difference. But because for next time's discussion, that's going to be an assumption. We're going to work with the assumption for next time that the issur to use the kli without tevillah is only issur d'Rabbanan, and we'll see how that plays out.